Hello! In this video I will build and paint a 1/72 scale model of a BT-7 M1937. The model is a digital product from Night Sky Miniatures and was printed by me with a SLA 3D printer. I'm Andy and you're watching ModTop. All the digital products of Night Sky Miniatures are made in scale 1/56 and were meant for wargaming. But rescaled to 1/72, they have an amazing amount of details and they don't need to hide behind most commercial plastic models in this scale. And since I get most of my enjoyment out of my hobby from painting models and researching the historically correct markings, such easy to build models are perfect for me. The files come in 4 parts for this tank, and because of the rescaling, I did not use the pre-supported files, but added my own supports before printing. Also, I really like the detailing, but that doesn't mean that there is no room for improvements. And so I drilled out the exhaust pipes. Because I was scared that the thin resin could break, I used a hand drill instead of a machine. I did the same with the headlights. One thing that is unfortunately always necessary somewhere with 3D printed models is sanding. Sanding support residue, sanding visible layers, or just sanding for fitting the individual parts together. Sanding, sanding, and more sanding. A really important point when drilling or sanding resin is to wear a mask. It doesn't matter whether it is cast resin from a commercial model or printed UV resin, the stuff is poisonous and causes long-term damage. Wear a mask, work with a spray booth, clean your hands, and make sure that the remaining residue ends up in the vacuum cleaner or is immediately picked up by a wet cloth so that it cannot be stirred up again. Take care of your health. Back to the model. Since the turret and the hull do not have a security system that holds them in place like with plastic models, I drilled out 2 holes and glued in 5mm round magnets. Then the turret can be turned very easily and it doesn't just fall off when I lift the model up. I usually cover the bottom of my 3D printed models with a very thin layer of cardboard, simply to conceal the necessary drainage holes. After everything is dry, it's time for priming. I used a light gray acrylic primer. After enough drying time, I found a few imperfections, and yes, that means it's again time for sanding. Let me say a few words about the paints and the markings I will be using. Before I started this project, I tried to find as many pictures of BT-7s as possible. And one picture caught my interest because the tank on the photo clearly wore a 3-tone camouflage. After a while, I could find out that the photo shows tanks of the Soviet 24th Light Tank Brigade and that it was taken in 1939. The tank on the photo itself is a standard BT-7 M1937, which is perfect for me and the chosen model I'm using. The camouflage is very interesting because there are definitely 3 different tones. Plus, there are thin black lines to frame the darkest color. Further research showed that the Russian army just introduced these camouflage colors and schemes a few months before the photo was taken. So it is very likely that the tank wore textbook colors, which makes it easier to define them. I started with the green tone and used Protective K from AK Real Colors. That's a green that was made for use for 2 or 3 tone camouflages. It's a little richer in color and not as yellowish as 4BO, which was used during the Second World War as standard color. After the color was dry, I used Camouflage Elastic Putty from AK for masking. I used small pieces of it to cover the areas of the model that should keep the green base color. I didn't use it for a while and it was a little bit fiddly as I started, but after a while I found the right way to handle it. That stuff sticks very nice to the model and can easily pulled off from the model after airbrushing. And not to forget, it's reusable for a long time. The next color I used was Sand 7K, also from AK Real Colors, and that's a light sandy color used from the Soviets for camouflage. At this time I also found a nice side profile on Pinterest of the tank I tried to replicate. The artist of the side profile came to the same conclusion as me regarding the colors of the tank, and that was a nice confirmation of my own research. Back to the model painting. After the sand color was dry, I did not remove the masking, but added new pieces of the elastic putty. And now I tried to cover all the light sand parts of the camouflage. The last color I used was dark brown 6K from AK Real Colors, and that's a dark brown with a somewhat reddish tone. After the color was dry, it was showtime. It is always something special to remove the masking and to take a look if everything worked. And it did. Not perfect, but good enough to work with. Of course, the paint was a bit too fresh for me, so it was time to go back to the airbrush. I added a few drops of a very light gray to each of the three base colors and lightened the colors a bit, and only in the middle of the larger areas and some raised details. Since the camouflage paint on the original tank was very fresh, I didn't want to overdo it. This was also a good opportunity to repair a few small errors in the base coat. And ta-da! My BT-7 now have a little bit of shading. Next I added the thin black lines around the dark brown by brush. I used the Vallejo air color for this, which is very thin and easy to work with. These black lines give a very interesting look, and I'm very happy that I have chosen this camouflage tank and not just a plain green tank. The next color used was a pure black. I painted all rubber parts of the wheels and the tracks itself. I base coated also the exhaust pipes in black and painted the inner parts of the headlights. The machine gun got a treatment with black gray and the little horn also, just for adding a little bit of contrast. And not to forget the metal parts of the spades. Both little jacks got a coat of a light yellowish green. Again, just for adding a bit of contrast and making the model a little bit more interesting. The wooden parts of the spades got a coat of golden brown. After that, I gave the tracks a dry brush with a metal color. This emphasizes all the places where the chains rub on the road and the paint or rust is worn away. And I also paint the parts of the chains that are up on the drive wheels. Now it's time for the marriage. I glued the tracks on the hull using super glue. So it seems all of my sanding and adjustments were good. Everything seems to be straight. So, before I could start with weathering, I had to add a few little items to match the photo. First, there is a rolled tarp on the left backside of the original tank. I 3D printed a few different tarps and chose one that I liked. It also needed a little bit of sanding to fit. The next thing are reserve track links that were standard equipment and which are unfortunately missing on our model till now. I also 3D printed some of them, cut them to length and made them fit. I painted the tarp in khaki and the track links got a coat of black. After everything was dry, I glued them in place with superglue. The straps of the top were given a coat of light brown to make them look like they were made of leather. And the buckles were painted with a metal paint. The exhaust pipes got a treatment with a very diluted coat of PVA glue and a few dry pigments. That's to give them a little bit of structure and to simulate some corrosion. After that, I gave the hull and turret a very light dry brushing with a light sand color, just enough to make all the edges a little bit better visible. To seal everything before the weathering, I gave the whole vehicle a coat of satin varnish. After the varnish was dry, I could start with pin washing. All recesses got a treatment with Ammo of Mix, dark brown for green vehicles, enamel wash. The satin varnish helps a lot, that the wash flows much better. After the wash dried, I removed it from everywhere I didn't want it. The larger stains on the raised areas were wiped away with a cotton swab. All other areas were blended with a brush soaked in white spirit. All the wash residue was removed completely if not needed. To give the tracks a bit more color, I used track wash from AK. That gave them a brownish staining and made them look not so brand new. The exhaust pipes and reserve track links got also a treatment. When the wash was dry, I painted some wood grain patterns on the spade handles with a brown. And I also painted some highlights on the tarp. I used the base color and added some sand color to brighten it up. I'm not a big fan of chipping in 1:72 scale, but I had a little failure in my paintwork and I wanted to hide it. So I used a dark gray-brown and painted a few chips on the most used area of the tank and along some edges. Here is less is more, otherwise the vehicle will quickly look like a wreck. The spade handles got a coat with a brown acrylic wash to blend the golden brown and the dark brown grain patterns better. And the metallic parts of the spades got a few brush strokes of a gunmetal color. Next, I use light rust wash from AK. I use it to paint some rust spots on the exhaust and on the replacement track links. The painted chipping effects are also given a layer of light rust. However, the wash is then blended in again with white spirit. One thing that you can find very often on BT tanks are recovery chains worn on the hull front. You can find them in several lengths from very short to long enough to get wrapped around half of the tank. Since the photo doesn't reveal whether the tank in question had such a chain attached, I will just take the liberty and attach one. I decided on a short version and glued a piece of chain to the hooks on the front of the hull. I then glued the loose chain links together with a very diluted mixture of wood glue and water. They were then treated with different rust tones to make them look a little more realistic. Then I thought about the contamination of the chassis. The tanks in the original photo look very clean. But I still wanted a light layer of dust, as if you had just driven down a dry dirt road. No mud or big dirt, just a bit of dust and a few individual splashes of dirt. I made this with different dust and dirt deposits from AK. The hull sides, the road wheels and tracks got a complete wash with a light greyish tone. Where the effects were too strong for me, I diluted them further with white spirit or washed them off again. I then refined the whole thing with a brown and a slight yellow dirt deposit tone. And finally, I applied a few small splashes around the vehicle. In order to fix everything and not to remove the effects with my hands when touching the model, the tank was given a layer of matte varnish. Now that the shine is gone, the whole thing looks a bit more military again. One thing is still missing. I wanted to apply some transparent UV resin to the drilled out headlights to simulate glass. To do this, I first painted the recesses with some chrome paint. When this was dry, the resin was used. A few seconds with the UV flashlight and the whole thing was hardened. And finally, my little BT-7 is finished. I've wanted to make a BT tank for a long time, and I'm very happy that I decided on a slightly more exotic paint job. I really like the models from Night Sky Miniatures, and I think they are exactly right for my purposes. I hope you enjoyed this video and you found something useful for you and your own models. If so, please like and subscribe, that helps me a lot. Thank you for watching and see you next time.